Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss how a week after Jeremy Hunt delivered his autumn budget statement, independent analysis is showing that the figures just don't add up, and it's going to leave the country in a financial mess in the next few years. This, of course, is all part of the plan. The Tories are leaving as much mess as possible to trip Labour up. As I've said in the past, they're damaging the country for political advantage. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So, never mind last week, even just over a year ago when Jeremy Hunt delivered his first autumn budget statement as a way of steadying the ship after Liz Truss, he claimed it was his job to get the country's finances back in order. This wasn't true. The only aim was to calm investors' fears. That's what had tripped Liz Truss up. You know, as long as the gilt markets were calm, it seems the Conservatives are happy to trash the economy in any other way. It was notable at the time that Hunt committed the government to heavy borrowing right up until the next election. And then the following Parliament was supposed to plug the hole in the finances by waving a magic wand or something. That was literally what was announced in last year's budget. It was, right, we're gonna borrow really very heavily, but don't worry, we've got a plan to pay for it. Oh, what's the plan? The next government will sort something out. That was what was announced. And this year's budget statement cements that position. The government that has the nerve to complain about Labour's plans to borrow up to £28 billion a year for investment is currently borrowing about 140, 150 million a year in order to leave a debt problem for Labour. And you can see how they intend to play this. In opposition, they will insist, well, we had this plan. We had a plan to pay it off and look what you're doing. Only there is no independent analysis to back up the fact that they have a plan. The Office for Budgetary Responsibility said there's nothing in the plans which suggests the debt can be cut in 5 years' time, which is what Hunt is insisting. Hunt's budget indicates that there will be £20 billion worth of cuts to public spending to pay for it. Well, this is austerity. The Tories are denying that this is an austerity budget, but the budget relies on significant public spending cuts in a few years' time. Cutting spending is literally the definition of austerity. But according to analysts from the OBR, Resolution Foundation, and even Institute for Fiscal Studies, Hunt hasn't actually said where these cuts are going to come from. So, oh, spending cuts. Where from? Oh, Whitehall. Yeah, that's the civil service. Where from? Now, there are two things I'd like to point out here. First, note that there's no claim from the Tories here that the measures will achieve growth and therefore the higher tax receipts in a few years will cover the cost. No, the Tories aren't even pretending that growth will cover these plans, unlike Labour's plans for borrowing, which will stimulate growth. So much so that although Labour are now talking about ramping up their £28 billion a year investment in green technology, I hope that's just pre-election caution, that they really go for it from their first real budget, which I'm afraid won't be for a good year after they come to power. The second thing to note is that because Hunt hasn't included anywhere in his plans where this 20 billion comes from, then his budget is delivering literally unfunded tax cuts in exactly the same way as Kwasi Kwarteng did. The only difference, the only reason it's politically palatable is because the markets haven't melted down. That is because he's screwing the country over, not investors. Reminds me a little of Boris Johnson's spending plans for the 2019 general election campaign. Analysts looked at the plans and they went, I'm not quite sure how you're going to manage these spending plans without tax rises. But Johnson had promised not to raise taxes. So essentially the spending plans didn't add up. But as the mainstream media bats for the Tories, the criticism was not widely reported. And what happened? We ended up with tax rises, but without the spending even. And we're getting the same thing again. If Labour produced a budget like this, it would be savaged by the media. The Tories are presenting spending plans to Parliament which involve borrowing heavily for another few years without any investment for growth. And I cannot emphasise that enough. Various analysts of the budget, independent analysts of the budget statement, have not identified any new investment. Like all this Parliament has been known for, investment-wise, is cancelling plans. Oh, there's been plenty of news of them cancelling the investment plans of previous Parliaments and offering nothing new in return. Like, what are they offering? Potholes. The economy remains stagnant. The latest from the OECD, it was out fresh this morning, shows growth forecast to remain below 1% for the next 2 years at least. Never mind what the reasons for that are now, because there are many. The bottom line is the government are borrowing now very heavily just to keep themselves afloat. They're not doing anything to stimulate growth for the future. And they expect the next parliament to balance their books when the growth outlook is negligible. The cost of living is already severe, driving even more people into destitution. We have almost Dickensian levels of deprivation in this country now, and the Tories are doing this partly because they don't care, but mostly because they aim to blame their own mess on Labour when they come to power, with the hope that they can eject them after a single term and then pick up where they left off. They are battering the country in the hope that, and this is perverse, isn't it? This is perverse. They're battering the country because they think that gives them the best chance of the country wanting them to come back to power in a few years' time. Utterly perverse. It's maddening that the public are unaware of this, because it would be quite impossible to behave this destructively if voters were informed. The only thing that keeps me going is the thought that maybe the Tories are forgetting that Labour will be desperate to win the following election as well, and that right now at least they're fairly well organised. They're not going to meekly fall into Tory traps. I mean, they're not doing it at the moment. They're not falling into the culture war traps. So why would they suppose that Labour will fall into the economic traps when they're in power? And you think to yourself, the worst state the economy is left in, perhaps, just perhaps, it forces Labour to fundamentally reform how we run the economy. But in terms of the situation right now, the Tories are basically like a con artist robbing a victim blind. They've drained their bank account, maxed out the credit cards and overdraft, and are arranging loan after loan with the intention of being long gone with the money when the consequences turn up. Frankly abhorrent. And we have independent bodies pointing this out in more sanitised language than I'm using. But it's been pointed out by official bodies, the Office of Budgetary Responsibility, the Institute for Fiscal Studies. It's their job to analyse government spending plans, and yet the public have no idea. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.